Yes, I'm delighted that James has agreed to speak to us this evening before the AGM. As you've heard, James is the Chief Executive of the World Federation for Animals, of which CCA are a member, and we're delighted to be a part of the World Federation for Animals. James has a long history of working with animals. He is a vet. I don't think you stopped being a vet. Is that right, James? You wanted a vet. You're a vet, and so he has obviously good knowledge of animals as a vet. But he's also, as well as being the current chief executive of World Federation for Animals, in fact, the first chief executive of World Federation for Animals. He previously was working with the RSPCA and also the cat protection. So he has a long history of working with animals, literally as a vet, but also with the major animal welfare organisations, and they don't come much bigger than the RSPCA and cat protection, frankly. So his background is impeccable, in my opinion, for the role that he currently has. I won't say too much about WFA because I know that James will speak in detail and has a presentation for you, a slideshow as well as a PowerPoint presentation, as well as his verbal comments. So I don't want to take anything away from that. He will explain what WFA does. But just to say, we are very excited about WFA here at CCA, about the role it has already played since it came into existence, and clearly the role it will lead the world animal welfare organizations in the years ahead, dealing with the various major problems that we face in animal protection and animal welfare and animal advocacy. So on that point, I will now hand over, if I may, to James.
Thank you, Chris, and it's wonderful to be here giving this talk. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you to Catholic Concern for Animals for being one of the core and early members of the World Federation for Animals. From this, we're only 2 or 3 years old, and we're there pretty much from the start. And it's also nice to see Joe, because RSPCA are a member, and Barbara's here because Animals Interfaith Alliance are a member, and we've got about 55 amazing members from around the world, all on our website. So thank you very much for being here. Let me turn this on to slideshow, and then hopefully everybody can see that. And I was going to say, with the dog downstairs means the cat probably won't be, but I've just heard her come in because I think she's heard I'm giving a talk, and so she wants to make sure she does her bit. So you might see her tail flick in and out. So Chris invited me to give a brief presentation on the World Federation for Animals, and to talk about some of the work we've done so far, and an indication of what we're all about and of the future. And as we know, there are billions, or if you include aquatic animals, trillions of animals around the world affected by what we as humans do, directly and indirectly, whether that's farm animals, animals in research, companion animals, and of course wildlife that are affected by our activities. But at the same time, while sometimes we feel like a small force against big vested interests, we know that there is concern for animal welfare around the world, from every corner, from Europe, from Americas, from Africa, from Asia, from Oceania. There are people who care not only in their everyday life, but who go that extra step of being part of organizations like we are. And at the same time, we know that the international policy sphere, where decisions are made about the future of the planet, that humans and animals share does not really have a very strong UN-based, UN-linked place for animal welfare. The World Organization for Animal Health has taken up that mandate, but we need that integrated in the rest of international policy work, particularly at the United Nations. And at the same time as this analysis shows, there are some areas where we, as the animal protection sector, do not only great work, but make sure it's coordinated to be more effective. But there are many areas where that coordination is fairly limited, or where actually, before the World Federation came into existence, there wasn't really any current strong coordination for this policy work, which, as I say, we absolutely need in order to be effective, because we are those small voices that need to come together. And at the same time, we know that animal welfare is not only important because of the suffering and the potential enjoyment of sentient animals with intrinsic value, but we know it's also linked to many of the really key aspects that the United Nations is concerned with. So biodiversity loss, of course, every damage to nature is either damage to animal populations as individuals that make up those populations, or is damage to their habitats or their resources or their needs. Pollution, by the same token, we think of them as environmental issues, but actually most of the key imagery and concern over lots of pollution is about its impact directly on animals. And there is a lot of work on plastics at the moment. And of course, the key images there are, turtles with plastic bags, or seabirds entangled, or whales or other aquatic animals caught in ghost fishing equipment. Climate change, we know, of course, animals, millions or billions killed in forest fires, but also floods and droughts. They are affected directly and seriously by animal welfare, by climate change, while at the same time they are key sources of carbon mitigation and adaptation. We need animals who can cope, who have good welfare, for nature to adapt to the changes that are coming, whatever we do now. And finally, human health, and particularly now we see it as part of one health with animal health and the environment. And I think memories are fading a little bit about the pandemic and how awful it was from COVID. But again, we know that a zoonotic pandemic has had already that major impact on human health and well-being and economy even. And in a way, we're waiting for the next one, from how we treat wildlife or how we farm. And I think it's a nice way I like to think about it, where the individual animals, their welfare, what works for them, their integrity, their dignity, their suffering, their treatment, they make up the ecosystems along with plants and other organisms and abiotic aspects. So what we do to those individuals affect those ecosystems, and what we do to those ecosystems affect the planet, affect the overall pollution, affect the climate, affect civilization, while at the same time we have global supply chains and global human impacts that then affect nature, which affect those individuals in it. So we see that microcosm, macrocosm, that are part of the same issue. And I think for too long we've seen environment and animals, or humans and animals, as separate issues. But we know, and the science increasingly shows, how closely they are interrelated and integrated, and how our solutions need to help humans, animals, and planet. And we did a report earlier this year on unveiling the nexus between animal welfare, environment, and sustainable development. And it covered most of these issues, such as biodiversity and climate change. But I flag up one here about how animal welfare also has impacts on food security and livelihoods, particularly of the most vulnerable people, who are, of course, also vulnerable to impacts like nature loss and climate change. And particularly through the intensive farming aspects that use up feed that could be provided for humans or have local impacts on fish or on nature that affects those livelihoods of those most vulnerable people. So the United Nations has brought most of its issues together in one regime, one agenda that is an absolute flagship for the United Nations and a real vision of the future that we want. And it brings together poverty and food and health and economies and peace and environment. But it misses out, and we like to imagine if animal welfare had been included in those sustainable development goals back in 2015 where they were created, perhaps would have pushed different treatment of animals, might have prevented the pandemic, which not only has had those impacts, but actually has also set back sustainable development more generally. So the next agenda for sustainable development will be in 2030. That's when this regime ends, and we're halfway through and not on track. So we need to accelerate, and we see animal welfare as a core part of not only helping animals, but also pushing that sustainable development agenda as a driver of progress, as a driver of protecting nature and stopping the drivers of environmental harm. So what we're doing now across the Federation, and again, a reminder, the WFA is not the very small number of staff that we have, but is it's a federation, it's our members. We are doing two key things for sustainable development. The first is under the current agenda, where we're seeing how and promoting how and pushing and advocating for how animal welfare is not only important for animals and not only important for people who care about animals around the world, but is also really integral to catch up on sustainable development and bring those changes that we need. And at the same time, we're looking forward to that next agenda to make sure whatever it looks like, which is still to be determined, but to make sure that animals and animal welfare are clearly and strongly and integratedly included in that. And we've had some progress on this already, particularly linking animal welfare to the environment in the context of sustainable development that Chris mentioned, which is brilliant that we've had that in such a short space of time. So looking back to, this was last year, and I'm hoping you at least recognise one or two people there. This was the Nairobi meeting where the UN Environment Assembly came together and had the first ever recognition of animal welfare within a UN negotiated agreement. And it absolutely took that federation, it took that collective effort for people for many, many months or longer leading up to that. It was born from a conference in Africa, an animal welfare conference, and really brought in other members of the Federation to reach that success. And this year I'd say has been a challenging year, and Chris might talk about other issues, but it's been a challenging year, I think, for animal welfare. But the UN Environment Programme, who were tasked with producing a study from the resolution, at the UN Environment Assembly. They've progressed a scoping study, so there has been some progress that they can report next year at the next Environment Assembly. What they haven't done yet is the full study that they've been tasked with. So that is ongoing work, but again, we've pulled together lots of information. I think there are lots of stakeholders keen to be part of that. We've seen some other good stuff this year. The OECD had some guidelines that said businesses should follow the World Organization for Animal Health standards that some of our members were involved in pushing. The high-level political forum where sustainable development is discussed in New York at least included wildlife. Of course, it was really focused on the fact that sustainable development is not on track. There was a political declaration on pandemics shortly after that, again led by a number of our members come together, 4PAWS leading that work. That included One Health, which again is an idea that we're increasingly seeing represented in international policy work. And the quadripartite, where 4 UN organisations have come together, and with the One Health high-level expert panel, I apologise for that acronyms in this slide, but it was too busy if they were all in full, has talked about primary pandemic prevention, which of course means tackling the causes of pandemics, which are very significantly, and with 75% of emerging diseases, or 2/3, coming from animals, absolutely talks to how we treat animals and how we transform that treatment. And currently the UN General Assembly is ongoing, so we will see what comes from that. And looking forwards, we're just finalising our 3-year plan, because we've got a 10-year strategy and we've had obviously annual plans, but this is a really strong strategy for what we do collectively over the next 3 years. And the first is to make sure the UN at least recognises animal welfare, but we've achieved that already. The next is to make sure that animal welfare is included in the UN General Assembly. This is the main top meeting in New York. And the third that goes along with that is highlighting that animal welfare principles are integrated, particularly through environment, food and health, and really showing how, even if you are concerned mainly about that, absolutely you need to be treating animals better in our policy work to achieve these human goals, as well as our planetary goals, as well as what we absolutely morally have to do for our planet, for our animals, and for the rest of creation. And we do this as part of our vision, our shared vision across the Federation, which is a world in which animal sentience is respected and all animals have a good life, and that their well-being is protected by us and from us. Thank you very much. I've put on my contact details if anybody wanted more information, though Chris knows lots about what we do as well. Beyond that, I just say thank you again for the invitation, and very happy to take questions or comments.
Thank you very much, James, for this fantastic presentation. Would anybody have questions for James? I have a question, if that's okay, while we wait for other questions to come through, James. I mean, it's what you project going forward, especially leading to the 2026 new sort of deadline. How do you feel optimistic that these objectives can be achieved? How do you feel? I mean, this is a particular turbulent time, on the world is in a bit of a turmoil sadly, very sadly, in different, parts of the planet, and these are having repercussions on world economies and all the rest of it. So a lot of human activity. And it is, of course, aside from being very sad that this is happening for all those impacted, it is also, I wonder how much it might impact the pursuit of these objectives to advance animal welfare on the world scene. So yeah, so I'm wondering how you feel. What is your feeling from where you are, from where you stand?
Yeah, it's a great question, Clara. Thank you. And if I'm very honest, it depends on different days. So this year has been, as I say, I think not the most air-punching year for animal welfare around the world, and we are seeing, as you say, some really horrible things happening globally that are awful in themselves, that are priorities that need to be dealt with. You know, peace, not least, but food security and other issues, and seeing the impacts of climate change already a lot this year. So they are important things that the international community needs to prioritise. And at the same time, it's a tricky geopolitics time. Again, relationships, are obviously strained by a lot of these pressures. So they are all, reasons for concern at this point over this year and the next. I think the two things that give optimism, one is absolutely on international work, you have steps forwards and then periods of less progress. So that might make us put some question marks around the time frame. But if we keep going, if we keep that commitment, if we keep that fortitude and collaboration and work together consistently, then it will come. I'm very confident it will come, and not just animals in sustainable development. The future, looking even further forwards, has to be that animals are properly and genuinely included in international decision making, because they are part of the international community in the sense that they share our planet, even if they don't vote in elections. So I think that's the main bit of promise. And the other bit is, as I say, increasingly policymakers and others are recognizing how our relationship with animals is part of the problem. So grain issues are exacerbated by the fact that feed is fed to animals in intensive farming. And the more we see that, and the more international policymakers and national policymakers see that, the more that it's not just about widening compassion, but it's having a more informed, enriched, integrated compassion and responsibility for nature and animals and humans.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Are there other questions for James? Anybody else would like to ask while we have him? Barbara?
Yes, hi James. That was a fantastic talk. Thank you so much. My question's regarding the Sustainable Development Goals. You're talking about having a Sustainable Development Goal number 18 specifically for animal welfare. I've heard people talking about integrating animal welfare into all of the other 17 or most of the 17. Which do you think is actually the best way to go, or should we do both, perhaps?
So at this point, thank you, Barbara. Again, another really good informed question from another member as well. So it's a live, active question in the sense of there are arguments both ways, and there are some issues that are within sustainable development, like disaster work, that is integrated in several, and in some ways that can be as or more effective, because sustainable development and sustainable development goals are meant to be very closely integrated. And there's a lot of debate over how well that's achieved, but that is absolutely the idea across economic, social, and environmental aspects. At this point, frankly, we just don't know what the next agenda is going to look like. So we use the idea of the 18th goal as an imagination exercise, and it gives us something we can all understand and get and think, yes, we can understand. That would be brilliant. What's important is that animal welfare is in that next agenda, is integrated, but is also very explicit, that it's not lost. Until we know what it looks like, I don't think we can say what that will, what that should be. And as you say, there are arguments on either side. And for now, it's about us demonstrating that integration. It's about demonstrating the importance of animal welfare to humans who care about animals, to the planet, and to animals. And then that's ready, if you like, for as we learn and as the UN decides on that process, and we are positioned to help influence that and to help that thinking.
Yeah,
Clara, I think you might be muted. Although,
sorry, I was saying thank you so much, James, for the answer, and Barbara for the question. Gerald, I expect you wanted to ask a question as well.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's very kind of you. And to join the course of saying thank you, James, for the talk, which absolutely superb and very much appreciated. I mean, one of the things I'm going to ask something which is a bit more kind of a bit less about kind of the mechanics. It's a bit more about the on the ground aspects that we're experiencing, and in particular, one of the things which has become increasingly important in the UK and other parts of the world as well, with the climate change, the changes to our environment, have been issues like flooding. And with flooding in particular, which is why I'm using as an example, we've become also increasingly aware of the importance of the environment in mitigating flooding. Lots of people talk about the reintroduction of beavers, for example, but there are lots of other things to do with the nature of the way in which we've tried to channel rivers and the way in which we've tried to clear them, which have actually made the situation far worse for us. And I was wondering what your view was about how we persuade people that concern for our environment, concern for our world, concern for creation, in the sense that CCA would describe it, is integral to sustainable development, which tends to be a human-centric perspective.
Thanks, John. Again, really good question. And I was slightly worried as it was going that I'd get into a really technical question on flooding alleviation. But absolutely, I think it's about highlighting in a scientific way what those links are. So we know that we feel it in our hearts and our bones that how we treat animals is part of what's wrong, but also when it's nice, part of what's great about humans and human activity and what we do. But absolutely, I don't think everybody gets that, and there's a few minority who are particularly exploitative or harmful, but actually also the wider societal norms allow that, and that I think is partly because there has been a really good positive push on things like human rights, and they're of course they're good, desirable things. And things like the institutions like the UN are in their charter sort of human centric, and in many ways that's great, but it also can mean that they're human exceptionalists. And I think that's the difference conceptually we need to take people on. And I think it will also take from us never losing that moral integrity and emotional compassionate appeal, but also accepting we will need to talk to people about what is their primary concern, which in many cases, including for UN institutions and the people involved, is going to be humans. And that's the balance we need to strike. Absolutely, animals are important and have that intrinsic worth, but we also need to be talking to our audiences in a very scientific, informed way about what will help them achieve what their mandates and their goals are. But the good thing is that the evidence is increasingly supporting how our mistreatment of animals is part of what causes problems like flooding, but we could have a long list, but also better treatment of animals is part of the solution.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have time for one more question. If there are any, just any more, I'll give a few seconds in case somebody comes forward. And okay, Sheila.
I don't have a question, but just want to say thank you, because that was so informative and brilliantly concise summary of what the situation is and the way forward with the UN. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sheila. Okay, I think on this note is a good moment to end this session. And James, thank you so much again for such a wonderful presentation, for answering our questions, and for giving us a map as well as an overview of the situation, and also an acknowledgement of the difficulties that the animal welfare global agenda is understandably encountering, but also giving us reason to be hopeful and to be positive that progress is being made, will be made, and these objectives will be achieved for animals and for the rest of the ecologies that support all of life, not only human but also human life. So thank you so much. And yeah, this yeah.
Thank you, Clara, and thank you for the invitation to this. Thank you for being a member. Thank you, everyone, for listening and being so engaged, and great questions. And of course, if it's my place to say it, but I will. Thank you for everything everybody does for animals. It's all part of what will change the world.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege and honor and a great pleasure to be part of the World Federation for Animals, for CCA and its members.